ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. I'm Christian Guzman, joined by Steve Hauer, Mike Ostrowski, and Dominic Chapone. No Andy Pregler today because his voice fell victim to Matt Canada's offense.
Yeah, I thought I had a bad sports weekend between the Thursday night of Syracuse and Buffalo, and then Andy went and one-upped me with whatever the hell the Steelers are doing.
And Mike, I know Mike and Dom aren't Giants fans either, because that would have been the icing on the cake.
Oh, yeah. I forgot Mike's in the miserableness of Pregler at present. But Pregler was present.
For those watching live, there's a reason I'm wearing this hat and not this hat like I was this afternoon.
Dom's just happy he has an offense, unlike Syracuse football.
Yes, we struggle. I mean, secret dark horse Hurricanes fan here. It was good to beat Virginia. It's good. Tyler Van Dyke, TBD on what's up with him. But if mostly a good weekend. More importantly, Heat basketball is also back, so I'm not too angry.
And more importantly, we've had 3 days to marinate on what the hell actually happened on Thursday night between Syracuse and Virginia Tech. If you were here with us on Disloyal Idiots during the watch party, you saw Steve, Mike, and I lose our collective minds for an hour and a half. And that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah, for anyone who wasn't there, we literally walked out at halftime. It was so much fun that we didn't want to put ourselves through the second half of that.
Perhaps the players did as well. Oh, okay. And Steve got so mad during the
Notice how nobody said, "Oh wait, don't say that." Like, it was that bad. It just looked that bad.
And I have evidence that might be the case also, which we'll bring up later.
The plot thickens.
Well, you'll see what I mean. But again, also, if you were watching on Thursday, you'll notice that Steve got so mad, like he said pre-show, he shaved his beard.
Yep. Yeah, it was interesting.
And let's go to one of the main reasons why Steve. Let's go to one of the main reasons why Steve might be mad. Because we might as well get to it. Offensive line is definitely an offensive line for Syracuse. But when you give up 8 sacks, or was it 9? I forget now. To Virginia Tech over the entirety of that game.
It was 8. It was 8.
It was 8. So remarkably better than 9, but still 8. Syracuse has 1 life remaining on its cat and Garrett Schrader, although that last life is clinging on by the barest of threads. And that's because the offensive line decided to not offensive line against Syracuse. And I bring this up because I want to get Steve's reaction to the PFF grades that came out for this game.
For the record, I have not seen these at all in any way, shape, or form.
We love Pro Football Focus and their grading system. Again, the Mendoza line, it's a 1 through 99 scale for PFF, with 60 being the baseline. If you did nothing, if it was just you showing up, was a 60 for your baseline grade.
Assume that's chalk.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go pay special attention to the pass blocking grades.
Okay. All right. Just off my brain, I'm assuming average of like 48.
It's kind of weird. Let's put it this way.
Okay.
Because the 2 starting offensive linemen that we've thought have been the best this season have been Enrique Cruz and John Ray Reed. I think that's fair to say. And in the pass blocking grades, both did well. And Cruz was a 77.8 and Reed was a 72.3.
Okay.
It's when you get to the other starting offensive linemen where it gets a little bit dicey.
Do I want to know?
You don't want to know, but you have to know.
Okay.
Because Mark Petrie had a 53.2. So below the Mendoza line, not good, but not the worst.
Right. I mean, for the record, I believe last week, Jared Verse put Enrique Cruz through his paces, and his pass blocking grade was like 16 or something stupid. So, yeah, it's a bad performance, not abysmal.
So how would you react if Chris Bleish got a 35.1 pass blocking grade?
My reaction would be, what in the hell did Jacob Bradford do? Because you haven't mentioned him yet.
And here's where we get interesting. First of all, Bradford only played 27 snaps.
Okay.
Second of all,
I
that
saw those 27. Who came in for him?
You might not want to know that either.
Let's see. Wes Ho, maybe?
No, Steve. Let me ask you why you don't want to know.
Josh Aloha.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I got there.
Aloha played 18 snaps.
Okay.
Bradford played 27. And this is just pass blocking. Bradford had a 6.9. Nice.
That wow. Okay.
Aloha in pass blocking had a 1.4. And this is where we say
he's
goodbye to
done.
Steve. Yeah.
And this is where we go to a 3-man crew for the rest of the hour.
So again, we start with offensive line talk because we knew that the offensive line was going to be what made or break this season. And right now it's breaking it.
Yeah, I mean, somehow over the course of these 8 years, there has been no ability to bring in any semblance of depth in this squad, in this unit. There's been other units where we've been able to, facilitate having at least the ability to replace an injury. It seems like, and in this case, it was David Wollabaugh who came in as a transfer, and Kalen Ellis who came in as our returning best lineman out that wasn't, or most experienced lineman, should I say. It was probably a toss up between him and Enrique, who was the quote unquote best. But with the two of them on the pine, it has been amazingly not great. And could nobody step up in any way, shape, or form here? Like with all the transfers that have been brought in, with all of the development that should have been going on?
That is definitely a question that we could answer for a long time. But I think this goes now to, what happens behind them. Because Garrett Schrader has taken just a complete dip in form from the first 4 games of the season to the last 4 games of the season so far. And who knows if it was just a step off in competition, whether it was the phantom targeting call against Clemson. It could be any number of factors, but altogether, this is not the same Garrett Schrader that we saw at the beginning of the season.
This is 2020 Garrett Schrader. No, 2021 Garrett Schrader.
This is worse than 2021 Garrett Schrader, significantly. At least he could run.
No, 2021 Garrett Schrader was doing a lot of these same things, and teams weren't used to having to, put up with him running. So you couldn't scheme specifically for that. Also, play calling hasn't helped him in this, or maybe it's his reads that aren't helping him in the sense of the complete dearth of anything across the middle of the field, which is the only place we literally had charts and podcasts and everything about. The only place he can throw the ball is over the middle of the field. And yet we're throwing to the sideline on every play, and it makes little to no sense. So it's in my brain, I'm seeing a combination of his complete regression to whatever form he's in as combined and not assisted in any way, shape, or form by the offensive line. And then play calling that is not helping, work with his strengths, or the fact that he has no offensive line and getting the ball out of his hands quickly.
Well, I think also with the play calling issue, because I think we brought this up on the watch party, is that I don't put a lot of this on Jason Beck, because at least situationally, a lot of the play calls he's been making makes sense. But if you're trying to set up Schrader over the middle, like we also mentioned on the pod multiple times the past couple of weeks, Schrader hasn't had that option over the middle of the field because the people he would have had as options over the middle of the field have all been injured in Oronde Gadsden, Isaiah Jones, and Trevor Pena. And the people who they now have at their disposal in Damian Alford, Umari Hatcher, Donovan Brown, if they ever decide to, acknowledge the existence of Dan Filari,
it works every time they go to him.
Exactly. It is It is a situation where Syracuse has a strength at one position that conflicts with the strength of another position.
And that's kind of the conundrum where you're right. I think where the nuance is in this is the play calling. There's no problem with the play calling in a perfect world, but there may be a problem with the play calling with the personnel that we're stuck with at present. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm.
Because like you're in a situation, what Beck is calling, when you line up in the all-22 and look at it, you're like, this should work. And if the players on the field can't execute it, it may be a good play call in a vacuum, but if they can't execute it, then you're kind of SOL.
I think especially real quick, the lack of receiver depth. We talk about the offensive line a much, but I think losing Gadsden and then basically Isaiah Jones also is pretty much off the grid at this point with the alley, of course. So I think when you have that, it's pretty much Hatcher, Donovan Brown a little bit, but there's no receiving depth on this team whatsoever. Nobody can make a play.
The other thing on that too is you didn't even mention Trevor Pena, who's been out the entire year,
Yeah.
so that's our top 3 receivers.
Yeah.
And
gone.
even if you have depth, like you can replace 1 or 2, but all 3, including, I mean, Pena was also our punt returner and kick returner.
Mhm.
So I'm 100% with you there. Like, yes, Donovan Brown made a step up, but can enough people make a step to replace 3 guys?
So just real quick for some context, Christian, to your Garrett Schrader's regression between out of conference and in conference games. So basically his QBR was between like a 68, 69, and then about like an 89 in those first 4 games, which included Colgate, Western Michigan, Purdue, Army. That has dropped to no higher than 33.9, and Virginia Tech it was 11.7, which is a season low.
I'm not a doctor, but
the average across the 4 ACC games just roughly is between like 20 and 30 for the QBR for Schrader, according to ESPN.
And so now we're also at the point of like, what more can you do with the offense based on what you have at their disposal? Dino thinks, at least what he said in like in-game interviews, is that they need to establish the run more to help the pass. But we're also seeing at the same time, and I'm sure Steve's going to make a spreadsheet at some point about this, that the run blocking is just not there to help facilitate the Quinn Allen in the best way, shape, or form.
Yeah. The run blocking hasn't been abysmal. Like, it's not been phenomenal. I mean, yes, it was a 45.2 against Virginia Tech, but, well, I guess every game was below the Mendoza line. So, yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, okay. But Allen isn't helping the cause either. What's that, Mike?
No, I just said, and optimism gone.
Yeah,
Just like
Yeah.
right out the window. But like, I mean, Allen, I think we talked about it on the either last week's pod or on the game watch it was last week's when we were going down through my stupid spreadsheet of how, like, when you go back and watch the film, it's a combination of, guys are on assignments, but they're not moving people. And then Allen can't make a read or makes the wrong read based on what they're doing. And it's an amalgamation of suck right now.
And this is also probably another one of those issues of styles clashing and strengths conflicting with each other with the run blocking and the offensive line. Like you said, with the offensive line, like at least somewhat doing their jobs, but Allen isn't the same running back as Tucker. And maybe this offensive line blocking would be doing better if this was a running back like Sean Tucker was in the backfield for Syracuse. But Allen isn't the same hit hole and run. He's more of a let's survey a lot of options and then choose a read to go.
Right. He needs a line in front of him that's at least opening some semblance of a pathway for him, or seeing something open, as opposed to there being a hole and then it closing up, which works more for a Tucker style, LaDainian Tomlinson style back versus a Barry Sanders style back.
Exactly. And we saw that with Allen's agility in the bench stripe bowl, where he was a better horizontal runner than he was a vertical runner.
Yeah, LaQuinn Allen, I still feel like is an extremely talented running back that's being sort of handcuffed at present.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, again, what else can this offense do to at least salvage something? Because, yes, you didn't score that many points against Clemson, Virginia Tech, Clemson, UNC, and Florida State, but to only score 10 against Virginia Tech is the worrying thing as well. And I get it. This is a good Virginia Tech defense. When you're coached by Brett Pry, you got the Virginia Tech defense, who's coached by an architect of one of the best Penn State defenses of the last couple of years. It's going to be good.
But it's a good, we talked about it in the pregame. It's a very good pass defense that had an okay run defense. And for some reason, we still weren't good enough to run the ball against that defense. And that's the worrying part to me. Like, did they think that they were able, like, did Virginia Tech think that they, or like, again, have to watch the film, did they feel like they were able to bring people out of coverage and out of that solid pass defense because they knew we couldn't pass the ball and were able to recommit to stopping the run? Because they were able to. Like, if that was the shift they made, then it worked. And we didn't adjust to, counteract it at all.
Now we go to also one of the other worrying parts about this game against Virginia Tech, which was Syracuse's run defense. And it's another one of those worrying trends that we thought would go away after the gauntlet stretch of Clemson, UNC, and FSU. And it's Syracuse's inability to contain the outside run. Because anytime Virginia Tech ran through the B or C gap, it went for a minimum of 8 or 9 yards. And that is something that the Syracuse defense cannot consistently allow, because that's what happened against Virginia Tech, to allow them to extend drives, sustain drives, and eventually wear Syracuse into the ground.
I feel like the resounding silence is it's accurate.
All right. It's been a while since I said anything. So, yeah, that's exactly what's happened, Christian, where it seemed like every time VT called an outside run, you just knew that right at the line, the SUD line wasn't going to be able to close the gap. And then the pursuit that by the time the linebackers or the corners were able to pursue, it was like a 5 yards at the absolute minimum, but more often than not, like you said, like 8 to 10. And I don't know if that's just a product of SU's D line again being a little undersized, or having in the 3-3-5 where you really don't have a ton of immediate pressure. If teams are able to take advantage of that, knowing that, okay, most plays you're going to have a lot of people dropped back. So as long as you get your first set of blocks off, then you're going to be able to take advantage in the running game.
Do we want to go back to PFF for this? Because there's a very worrying trend.
Is it tackling?
No, tackling, yes. Tackling is very red, let's put it that way.
Because that's what I saw. The tackling grades were.
We were paced by a wondrous Kayvon Darton tackling grade of 26. The next was Chase Simmons, also a defensive lineman, at 27. Caleb Okechukwu at 30. So those three, that's not a great trend right there for people up front. Our run def was it? Did I start by run defense? I did. Okay. Run defense. Take a wild stab at who our 3 lowest rated run defenders were.
Look over your head. The position group is probably pretty obvious.
It is Kevin Jobany, then Caleb Okechukwu, and then Chase Simmons.
AKA all offensive linemen.
Defensive.
Yeah.
I mean, they were offensive in the game. But,
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, by the numbers, Terry Lockett and Kayvon Darton were actually two of our Hyatt, and Braylon Ingram were three of our three of our top four, and the aforementioned three were our bottom three. So,
And when
effectively
when you notice that all three of those guys that you mentioned, all interior defensive linemen.
Mhm. So, can you see where we were being targeted by any stretch here?
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a worrying trend. I wonder if Rocky Long will be able to adjust out of that, because yes, they were getting blown up, but the thing is, if they're getting blown up like that, there's a reason for that, and there's something else that should be open, or an ability to shift how that rover is playing. Are they playing more downhill? Is there something else we can do to shore up that outside run? And if we can't find something for that, it's going to be very much worrying. I have no idea. I haven't even looked at what Boston College is doing. I've been too depressed since this game.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's if we walk out of Friday's game without a W, something needs to burn down on the hill.
Should we get into that conversation? What?
We will get to it in just a bit, because I want to just do one more thing on this, because it kind of ties into the next conversation. Because on this run defense, one former Syracuse alum, Josh Black, answered some questions on Twitter because he had thoughts, and he basically did an open AMA session on Twitter. And if you're not watching on the live stream, first of all, Sundays 8 p.m. Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, Disloyal Idiots. Search it up. Josh, I'm showing Josh one of Josh Black's many tweets that he sent out on, I believe this was Saturday night or Friday night. I don't remember exactly when. That is Friday night.
Yeah.
When he's talking also about the 3-3-5, and what exactly is why this defense is okay right now. Because in the tweet, he says 3-3-5 fits our talent the best in terms of scheme and what guys we have and what we are currently recruiting. We don't have typical ACC caliber size and DL, so this will have to do. And that's just kind of a combination of, okay, because we don't have, because we're not going to be recruiting the typical size defensive lineman, you're going to have to use the system like the 3-3-5 to get creative in order to sort of generate any pressure up front.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what we've been saying since we started using it, and it's worked to this point. So now we're finding some cracks in the armor, it seems.
But what Dom was alluding to is now the big question that we're going to spend the majority of this podcast on. It's after this loss, you expected, I think a lot of people expected, at least Syracuse fans-wise, expected Syracuse to win this game. And for Syracuse to lose this game, and not just lose it, but lose it in convincing, decisive fashion. We started this conversation on the watch party, and we're going to continue it here on the pod. What does Syracuse do with Dino Babers? Because Steve and I have had this conversation for a while, and that we've been supporters of Babers. Andy has voiced that as well, that we think it would have been, in the past, rash decisions to let go of Babers just in what Syracuse can do or not. But after this, in a game where based on what we've seen this season, you expected Syracuse to at least be competitive in this game. It doesn't look like this is it doesn't look like now is a time where Syracuse can keep holding on to Babers in order to try and move the program up in the way that fans and other people want to.
If you had asked me last week, I would have wholeheartedly said this is a team that could still get to 7 or 8 wins, even after those 3 straight rough games. Now, I genuinely don't know if they will be favored. Or I should universally favored. I know this week there's some books are favoring BC, some books are favoring SU, but I don't know if there'll be clear favorites in the game the rest of the season at this rate, where you're coming off yet another primetime showing where the world is seeing that SU has no clue what they're doing.
I was on the same board. Oh, sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
It's just that for the most part, I've been a Dino supporter as well. To realize that, yes, he has his flaws, especially as far as some of his game management goes, but I still think that for the most part, he had the locker room for, at least past tense, had the locker room for a very long time and was getting the most out of the players that he was able to recruit.
Go ahead, Dom.
And now I see that, and Josh is kind of saying the point that I'm making here, that
so this is again part of the many questions that Josh Black answered. A Twitter user asked, "Do you think the players still believe in the coaching staff at this point?" And Josh Black responded, "There are some, but nowhere near all. Watch effort on tape; that'll tell you everything you need to know."
And this is a former teammate of some of these guys,
and a person who's been on the Baber system during all of his years in college, and a person who voluntarily chose to come back for another extra year of college to play under Babers and to play at least for Syracuse.
Yes, coming back, he had the extra COVID year, so for him to choose to come back under those circumstances, that should tell you that, like, at the time he had that much faith in the program, but now where it stands, I don't know how you can, like, with a straight face, tell your team after 4 straight losses of that magnitude that we're still fine, that nothing is wrong, and that we're going to still find a way to finish the season strong.
To continue that with Black, why do you think some of the players have lost belief in the staff? Josh Black replying, not having enough faith, not playing for anything special, constant blowouts. Probably many players being individual, not a cohesive team dynamic, to make a few.
Yeah, and that's I'm curious because Black, the COVID year was under Tony White, and I'd assume he saw something that worked. And Tony White had this defensive unit as a unit and very on the same page, and a group that worked well together and worked well game day, listening to what White was preaching and responding and whatnot. I'm curious if all the turnover from that point, like, you lost a good number of position coaches, you've lost White as a defensive coordinator. Like, Babers is still the head guy, and I don't fault Dino for a lot of things. Like, much like you said, Christian, have been a staunch supporter for a long time, but is this staff that got assembled this year another piece of the puzzle? Steve Farmer coming in to coach the offensive line, not a great reaction from that group. Rocky Long's defense, a lot of similar personnel to last year, and a seeming huge regression, including the addition of folks like Miles Farmer and another year for Bellamy and Gould as transfers. Like, there's like Josh said, if there is a splintered locker room, that could be a coaching staff issue as much as anything. And that's part of that's on Dino for the staff he assembled.
And to be fair, at least to the transfers, like, Farmer was the highest graded defensive player, even though he only played 20 snaps. Brandon Ingraham was the second one, even though he only played 31 snaps. Bellamy at least had good run defense and tackling grades, not so much coverage grades, before he unfortunately left the game due to injury. So, there, like, transfer-wise, at least, you think the transfers have done well, but it's another instance of they haven't actually been given the opportunity, except for Bellamy, to at least come into a game and impact it for the entirety of said game.
I think that's why the timing, just for all this whole conversation, like, when we all did our predictions, I think it was clear, like all of us, Mike, I think you were the only one that was like, basically were like, if there's any game to have an upset in, it would be the North Carolina game. But we all, for the most part, had we would lose to Clemson, lose to Florida State, lose to UNC. The Virginia Tech game was at the very least more of a toss-up / like a lean win for a lot of us. And I think what was so demoralizing was we still can't get over that this was a bye week. Like there was extra rest. This was the time to reset. And you kind of, I think the scary part is that Boston College has won 4 games in a row. I know their last one was against UConn, which isn't much, but like they're coming in with a little bit of here. And you look at the week after, and it's the weird Yankee Stadium. You know, Pick is its own disaster train wreck of its own right now. We also historically have never done well against Pitt for the past couple of years. At what point do you find any momentum to get back up? Because after that, you're facing a Georgia Tech team that just beat North Carolina. So there's not really a lot of for the rest of this season, at least, there's not a lot of outlook in favor of anything positive. Not to be the pessimist like you are, Christian.
Well, again, this is we'll bring another one of Josh Black's answers. As a Twitter user asked, like, what about Syracuse? Do you feel happens after such a hard start 2 years ago and then a sudden drop off, or 2 years in a row and then a sudden drop off? Black response: complacency is big, loss of focus. It's easy to keep doing the same things you were doing if you were on a hot streak. As opponents get better, you have to do more. You're staying late for extra film, doing pre and post practice technique work still. Every minute adds up. And not only have we seen that big drop off in terms of quality 2 years in a row, but as we continue to see, especially after a bye week, it doesn't feel like Syracuse has come up to the task to answer the call of being a refreshed team and a refocused team after the bye week.
And just some short-term bias, going back to last season when they did win coming off the bye week. Now, of course, NC State was nowhere near 100%, but you almost have to wonder if just that short-term bias of, okay, we snapped out, we were able to maybe break that trend of doing bad post-bye week last year and not really worrying about it as much as they should have this year, if that's a possibility.
I wonder if there's also a possibility, like, we have to ask ourselves the bigger question of, like, do we go back to last year and say, like, how much of a fluke it was? I'm not going to go on that crazy bandwagon. But if you look at it, like, when we played NC State when it was ranked, they didn't have a starting quarterback. When you play Louisville, you're playing them in the first game of the year where it's kind of like you really don't know what's going to happen out there. And the reason why I bring that up is that if you look at Babers' 8-year track record, there's a clear bad outlier, which is in 2020 when they went and won 1 game. And then there's a very, very good outlier in 2018 when they went 10-3. Yeah, 2018 when they went 10-3. Every other year has been either 4 wins or 5 wins, except for last season, which was 7 wins. So at a certain point, people are holding out hope for Babers that there will be a turnaround. But at some point, we've also seen that in about 8 seasons, they've been at 4 or 5 wins for, 5 of those? And then only basically 2 bowl seasons, pretty much. One which was very fringe. So I think that's a conversation we had too.
And really just the struggles with finishing a year. Like, I know last year there was the awful 5-game losing streak, but the year before that, they were 5-4, and then they lost the last 3.
Completely fell off a cliff. Yeah, they were terrible.
So when you have that happen over and over again, and you have at least some consistency across those 3 teams, that has to get in your head a little bit, saying that just, oh boy, here we go again. The strong starts don't actually mean anything because we keep falling apart when it matters the most.
And so now we get to a very difficult question. If Syracuse somehow turns around the inconsistency that we've seen for the past 4 weeks and gets to 6 wins and somehow makes a bowl, do you still keep Babers?
If I could get the first word in here, we're under the assumption that his contract runs through next year.
Yes.
Politely tell him we'd like you to find another background position after next year, and we can start the transition process a year early. If they can make back-to-back bowl games, then even if it's an ugly way of making back-to-back goal games, then yes, you can keep him one more year. But beyond that, unless they go on I'd say unless they get 7 wins. If they get 7, then that's a different conversation. But say they're 6-6 going into a bowl game, whether or not they win that game, you say you've got one. You have put this program in a better position than it was when you took over, but not enough to warrant another long-term contract extension.
It's a weird situation where to go with it, because I think we've talked about it in Slack a couple of times of like, I would not mind in any way, shape, or form if we kept Dino Babers around the program. But if the results are holding as they are and everything's currently holding as they are, the shakeup needs to happen. Now, if we lose to BC, when does the shakeup happen? Is a different question.
They go into the donor game. That's
Yeah.
If you really want people to buy into the future, I don't know how you can sell a second straight year with a 5-game losing streak.
You're also going into this BC game with the potential of their backup quarterback playing as well in Emmett Moorhead.
Oh, the return of Moorhead?
The return of Moorhead.
Yeah, the Castellanos have not been doing well in the month of October for whatever reason.
I mean, Moorhead didn't do good in the all of 2022, so
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then Tom, you weren't here for this when I brought this up on the watch party, and I'm going to be interested to hear this take from you as well.
Yeah.
Are the Syracuse Orange in a Las Vegas Raiders situation? Because if you recall from the Raiders offseason last year, Mark Davis came out in public. He said, yes, I know fans would love us to fire Josh McDaniels, but we do not have the money to fire Josh McDaniels. Is Syracuse in that situation right now also?
I mean, Mike could probably speak for us too, that there's a good amount of the students who are pretty, I mean, the student perspective wise, think people are pretty annoyed. And these are the people who, even the oldest seniors, their freshman year was that 1 in 10 year. So from a student perspective, as from that financial perspective, I think that this contract makes things so complicated because we knew from the beginning that it was like, wait, so if they got a bowl game, he's good. But then if they went 1 win short, he's not good. What do you do with the recruitment class that's super promising? Do you just risk that as a means of finding a new voice? And then Steve, I was kind of interested in your point. When you say keep Babers around, would that be in a kind of Boeheim role where he's kind of an assistant still in athletics, or would that be kind of as a coordinator of some kind? If Babers gets,
I would think more off field.
Yeah.
And not necessarily handling X's and O's or anything. But then at the same time, that's mostly predicated on not finishing in a complete torpedo and trash can fire. If that happens, there's no way, shape, or form there's any saving grace. But say they finish 7-5, and you want to have that conversation that we were talking about earlier of hey, we're going to move on. We want this to be a transition. We're still going to pay you because we can't buy you out. What are we doing? And then you get somewhere in between the weird Las Vegas Raiders situation and where you want to be. And I don't know. The big difference is we can't tank like the Raiders could to get a draft pick. There's no method for that in college football.
Yeah, I was gonna say from an actual context situation, Christian, I agree that I think this is very Raiders-ish, but I think the challenge is so let's say Syracuse pulls the plug on Babers after this year. Are we just punting? Is next year just a punt? Or likewise, even if he stays, it just gets so awkward because if you choose to extend Babers, whether it's this offseason or next offseason, you still face the doom and gloom outlook in 25 where the schedule just gets astronomically hard. Just based, and there's going to be some changes, of course, on Monday. But long story short is that what is the highest ceiling that you can get with Babers? Because it was that 110 win campaign, then you're kind of looking at nothing else. So is there an actual arrow pointing up? Because if it's not, at least I'm on the bandwagon of it's better to rip the Band-Aid off and kind of just get it over with than drag what this might be the rest of this year and then all of next year. But I don't know if that's too radical.
I think there is one way you could probably do it this year, and that is if you can somehow get Sean Lewis or Tony White to come back to the program next year.
Yeah. I mean, inherently, Sean Lewis would be the option. Or are you talking with Dino still as a figurehead, or are
No,
you
head
talking
coach.
you're talking the
Full thing.
rip the Band-Aid off,
Yeah.
have White or Lewis back as a head coach?
Yeah, I think that's the only way that you can salvage this. I don't obviously White and Lewis are not coming back for a coordinator job. Both of those guys, their next job is a P5 head coaching job.
Yep.
Can you convince one of those guys to come back to Syracuse for that first P5 head coaching job?
The only way I see that is if you give them a lot of control. So if that means they can bring in their own coordinators, which means SU is willing to spend even more money, possibly replacing some of the people they just got this year.
Well,
And if that's
inherently, I don't know if coordinator deals are usually multi-year or anything.
Yeah.
Usually it's a year-to-year.
I just know because Anais was 3 years at NC State. I didn't know if it's like really a thing here too.
I think, maybe there's some weird opt-out type thing. Like if the staff, usually there's some mechanism for press the oh shit button. Like once a staff goes, the whole staff goes.
All right.
And whether that's just we suck up the money, but usually like you never see a staff go and then a couple of people, or rarely do you see a whole staff go and then a couple of people are retained unless there's, reasons for it or some ties. Usually it's like if the head coach goes, house is clean.
All right.
Now that's if it was White, then who knows? I guess Lewis too, because some of the guys that coached with him are still there. But if there is ties, then something like that could happen.
So that leaves us with this. Being a prophet is hard. We've already established that with the ups and downs of our predictions. Do you think Babers makes it through this year?
I think it all depends on this next week. As simple as if they beat BC, then you're really not in a position to fire him because he could theoretically still lose the last 3, but you won't know until that last game if he actually makes a bowl or not. If you lose to BC, and again, this might be a scenario where having the corporate game actually gives a little clarity, because I stress again, how on earth can you sell that as the future to your investors if you have 2 straight years with a 5-game losing streak and are still acting as though the person who has guided the program during said 5-game losing streaks is around for the immediate future? I really don't. I think if you lose to BC, especially if you lose badly to BC, you've got to pull the plug like right then and there. Like post-game presser, Dino Babers has been fired.
And this is, mind you, this is also with 2 3-game losing streaks in 2021. So
I don't want to go the radical route and say he doesn't get fired. I just have a weird feling that like things will just stay the same somehow. Like
you too, Syracuse athletics.
Well, because
if history tells us anything, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like, if I'm going to go most realistic, I say he doesn't get fired. If I'm going, what I would think would like happen if that was, I would say probably after that Pitt game, because if you lose, everyone's talking about the BC thing on donor day, but if this continues and you have a 6-game losing streak following the Pitt game, which Athletics agreed to move it to Yankee Stadium instead of keeping it a home game, causing the whole indirectly causing the whole disaster that's been this whole October and heading into November here. I would say probably the Pitt game is my deadline in terms of that, because at that point you can't salvage a 6-game losing streak and you guys still face Georgia Tech, who again I think is looking better, and Wake Forest, who's looked pretty decent. Like Syracuse can still win 6 or 7 games. There's also a universe they might just not win more than one ACC game this year. Very entirely possible.
Well,
Yep, that sounds right.
yeah. Before as we wrap a bow on this conversation, and we hope for the swift resolve to this fire sale of the situation. Before we move on, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors of the pod, Home Field Apparel, your one-stop shop for all your Syracuse throwback gear or needs. If you go to Home Field Apparel, you can use the code NUNES23 and UNES23 for 10% off your first order for all your throwback Syracuse comfy needs. Again, that's Home Field Apparel. And you can check out all the other colleges they have there as well. I'm not sure if they have a Damon or whatever, however you pronounce that DQ college's name, but that's what Syracuse basketball played in its first opening preseason game. And we are once again in the time as a flat circle universe of there's being optimism over the Syracuse basketball program and people wondering when the Syracuse basketball start. Well, it happened on Friday night. Mike and Dom were there to watch as Syracuse opened up the Adrian Autry era with its first preseason game. And results are okay, but mixed at the same time, I would assume.
Mike, I don't know if you want to go first, but I can chime in, or I'll just chime in real quick.
You're the basketball expert, my man. You go ahead.
I think clearly what happened is that SU played, I would say for the most part, pretty well in the first half. They were up over 20 points. I think they kind of took their foot off the gas in the second half, especially Damon was hitting a lot of open threes. It was like a 20-point lead. It came down to like 12, kind of never got really close than that. But I think the big takeaways, Mike definitely pointed this one out, was the change in, I think, just the vibrancy of being in the dome, like seeing how Autry was reacting to the different players. If there was a mistake, keep him out there. Just the coaching philosophy changed from older Boeheim to Autry, I think, is definitely a good addition, especially for the current sophomore class, which is some pretty key guys. Obviously, the big story with that was Judah Mintz right beforehand, finding out he's not playing, suffered an injury earlier last week in practice. Based off the way Autry dealt with Malik Brown, it's clear that this is more of a precautionary measure more than like what I think would be like an actual long-term injury, because Malik played 6 minutes, had a little ding up, and then basically didn't play the rest of the game. And it wasn't Autry, but both Mike and I had since confirmed after the press conference that it was just more precautionary in terms of it being the preseason. Big thing, I think, of course, is looking at how some of these transfer players looked. I was a big fan of Starling attacking the rim. He looked pretty comfortable with the ball in his hands. Excited to see that. Mike, I think probably the transfers, kind of some of these new additions, are probably what stole the show this time around, as well as some of the growth from the current sophomores like Kadir Copeland.
Yeah, and then the other big transfer, Naheem McLeod, emphasis on big because, God, the dude is massive. I'm very interested to see how he is used as we get into the games that count. Now, he's not going to be the 30 minutes a night guy that Jesse was, but I did like him a lot in terms of, like, he just has insane reach. On the back end, he barely has to do anything to play defense. You can just park him near the rim. And I believe Kevin's the one that actually brought this up in our Slack. It seemed to me that Naheem was in for man defense, and Malik was in for the very brief time that they played the zone defense. You almost wonder if they switched those around, or at least to try at some point, because the one part where Naheem struggled on the back end was he's not. If you force him out close to the perimeter, he is going. It seems like you can get space by him. So, in that sense, it seems like it'd be better to just let him be parked under the rim on defense and trust that the other guys are going to hold their zones on the outside.
As the old guy here, you know what the reason was? Malik was here last year and actually understands what to do in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Yes, that is completely fair.
Yep. That's because I thought about it way too much when everybody was talking about it. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he was here. He got taught the zone for a whole year. And one thing over the years that you'll see is people trying to learn that zone. Because I'd assume, having been in the system as long as he was, Red is going to teach a very similar zone to what JB did. It takes some time. It's not a quick grab and go. So
C21, 22 season.
Yeah. I'll echo Mike's point. I think honestly the biggest on-court difference was what life is like without Jesse Edwards versus what life is like with Jesse Edwards offensively. Because I think it wasn't an issue just when you had Jesse and he commanded the ball in the post. You had to kind of build the offense around Jesse in a sense, because he's your primary post-up player. He's getting you the shots. Naheem has no post-up game whatsoever. But I think it's again a Division II opponent. We're not going to overreact to one game. But this Syracuse team quietly has a good amount of ball handlers. Like, they have guys who are just going to attack the rim constantly. It's Mintz when he's back in. It's Starling. It's Copeland. Even like Kyle Cuff, he was getting to the rim a couple times there. So I think a common theme within this year's team is that there's going to be way more of a willingness to attack the rim and kind of go downhill rather than half court. Because Boeheim played a lot of half court, slow the ball down, dump it into Jesse, kind of space the floor a little bit, but not too crazy. So I think that dimension change is going to be huge, especially when you're looking at the ACC landscape this year. And a common theme is that these teams have a bunch of hyper athletes, and you're kind of going to need to take advantage of all of that. So I think that's probably an interesting dynamic moving forward, is what life looks like kind of playing outside in rather than inside out.
And I think that's why I think one of the most important players this year is going to be Justin Taylor, especially what we saw in the exhibition where they went on that hot streak in the first half. Because as you said, when we expect the starting guards to be Mintz and Starling, both of their games, when you think about it, are very, very similar. They're both score-first guards who are going to attack the rim and don't necessarily have a high percentage jump shot. So that being said, you're going to need some sort of outside scoring in order to offset and balance that. And as much as Chris Bell was going to be in the starting lineup, he still hasn't shown that consistency to be that outside scorer who can also stay on the floor. And maybe that's going to be Taylor this year.
Well, we're not going to see Bell pulled 50 seconds into a game. But, but judging by what JT did, he may end up being the go-to guy for distance this year. And I think that's a bit of another big difference compared to last year, is there's a lot more plug and play in the way this roster is constructed, where you don't have like, okay, Jesse's really the only guy that can go right to the basket. Gerard was pretty much the only guy you'd go to for the three. Now you've got several guys who they're not all like incredible at one thing, but they're all good at several things. So being able to mix up the rotation a bit, like as we said, we saw Malik at the 5. We saw some 3. I believe there's at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, Dom, but there's one point where they ran 3 guards, right?
Oh, they ran 3 guards, but I see Taylor personally. I know he's on the taller side. I think he's more of a 2. Just because I don't he can't. So that's the only challenge, is that I think the wing rotation is super fascinating for Syracuse, because you're playing Mintz and Starling together, and they're both 6'4", 6'3", around there with a huge wingspan. But your wings are pretty much Benny, who he hit 40% of threes last year, but the volume was super low, and he can occasionally he can't basically create his own shot consistently enough to command a lot of minutes. Bell, if the outside shot isn't there, he really can't do anything. Like, just based off last season, like even this game against Damon, he went 1 for 7 or 1 for 8 off the top of my head. And he only played 13 minutes. Now, obviously, like, it's preseason, you take it, but I think the challenge for Autry probably is going to be like, do you go more in the 3-guard lineup, like Mike said, because that was honestly pretty common with Damon, or do you try to play Benny at the 3 and go bigger, but then you sacrifice some floor spacing there? Because if it's not Taylor, you're really banking on one of the guards to step up, or you're banking on Bell to really take a leap in terms of being not just a consistent shooter, but I think he has to be playable on the other ends. Like, you can't have a starting small forward grab 2 rebounds per game and not do anything defensively in the ACC. It will just not happen. So I think that wing rotation is probably the biggest concern, I'd say, for Autry, just based off this exhibition game.
Chance Westry would have really helped with that.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately,
maybe next year.
Hold
Because
on.
hopefully
A
that
Syracuse
indefinitely.
athlete got injured? Really?
We should also mention real quick that Monir Hema was also did not play in the exhibition, but Peter Carey did. So at least we have a continuous rotation of 7-footers we can just throw out there.
Continuing the trend of Moni Hira. Oh, I forgot he was on Syracuse.
Also, no William Patterson, although that was strictly Autry saying he's a freshman. He's going to take a little time to get acclimated. So,
Again, he's not one of the Patterson. I think we all knew this because Patterson wasn't one of those high-rated recruits that usually jumps off the page. So I don't. It'll be tough for him to crack the rotation just in general this year.
I doubt it's going to happen because we forgot to mention this, Mike, but it was brought up. Benny Williams also saw some time at the 5 too. That for sure happened because he rarely played, if at all, at the 5 last year. So if you're Autry, you're probably going Naheem McLeod for the majority of at least half of it. Then a mix of Malik Brown at the 5, maybe throwing Hema for like 5 to 10 minutes if you can, or even Benny. I think they're probably going to play all those guys over Patterson this season.
But one of the worrying things about this team, and whether it's man or zone, still always happens to be 3-point defense. And I get Damon is a good 3-point shooting team. They were a great 3-point shooting team last year, over 40% as a team last year. But still, that's not ideal.
I will say that in the second half, you could tell that SU had entered practice mode. They really were not like hugging the perimeter that much. If you want to look at what the first half stats were, then I think paint a clearer picture. If they were about the same, then there's concern. But I want to say they, at least right out of the bat in the second half, you could tell SU came out flat. I want to say Damon hit 3 threes in a row in like right out of the locker room, and then right after that, SU reset a little bit and tightened up. So I am not nearly as concerned about the 3-point defense as I have been the last 2 years. It's not going to get fixed overnight, and Dom, I think you'll also agree with me on this. From what we saw in the man versus in the zone, the man, for being just implemented, looked significantly better than the zone.
Yeah, no, I think, the one thing with the man that was nice is, again, Kevin did an article about this months ago about this. I think this is before actually Judah Mintz returned, about this team just has so much like of a wingspan now. Like they cover, so we joked about like they should just run like their tallest players in the corner and just kind of trap the other half side, because they have so much length that they can kind of really wall off a lot of the inside cuts. And I think even whether it's Naheem or Malik Brown, there's like a good intimidation factor at the rim, I think, which is nice. I'm personally not concerned about the perimeter defense either, because Christian, you brought up an excellent point that Judah and Starling kind of play a similar style offensively. I think if you're Autry, you're kind of like doing the my turn, your turn thing in a more systematic way, but you don't need Mintz to be the primary ball handler all the time. There are other guys who can play make. I think Mintz's promise on defense last year, I think will really shine. You pair him with Starling, who's a 6'4" shooting guard. He could play 1, 2, and even some 3. He's got the wingspan for it. I think honestly, defensively on the perimeter they'll be fine, because I think when you replace Gerard with Starling or just another wing that Syracuse has, I personally think that's an upgrade, a far better system, especially in that man concept. I don't know if Mike, if that's just me, or Steve, you got anything to say?
Oh no, I missed something completely that I didn't know was happening in this game. How did we get this far into the? Oh wait, no, it's because I'm old. That's why. We
made it almost a full pod without mentioning that.
This far into the Damon conversation without any talk of the fact that Preston Shumpert's 2 kids both played on that squad.
Yeah, I forgot about
the
that.
dome.
Yeah.
Like, I have fond memories of their father playing for many years at Syracuse, and when you pull up their roster, they look exactly like him, and it's kind of creepy. So yeah, fun. I have nothing to actually contribute to the conversation. I just needed to bring that fact up.
Well, I know a conversation you can contribute to, Steve.
Oh God.
Draws.
No. Hey, we're out of draw season.
Yeah, but the team that Syracuse is facing in men's soccer next Also draws.
Yeah. So yeah, if anybody didn't see, Syracuse finished their season somehow drawing against Boston College on the road because, well, that seems to be all we do this year.
6 draws.
Yeah, I don't get it. Now, that said, if you think back on other seasons, there were a lot of games that were decided in overtime.
This is true.
So without that, you get 6 draws. We're now heading into extra time season, which the ACC championship kicks off on Wednesday. Syracuse drew the NC State Wolfpack, a team that they drew last week away. No, that was home. Great. They finished their season at home, drawing 1-1.
Remember how Syracuse? Yeah, own goal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Syracuse scored their only goal of that game, 1-1 on an own goal.
So yeah, I think some things. Now they're hosting NC State again. Hopefully they figured something out last game because we're going to need something out of them to actually survive in advance. Right now, dare I say SU would be on the outside looking in for the NCAAs. They're probably right on the fringe and need a game, maybe 2 in the ACC championship to kind of lock something up here. So hopefully they can get something. I know, Mike, you've kind of been paying attention as well. What are you thinking?
I think they need at least a game. Like this is, if you're one and done, it does significantly more damage than just winning the one game. I haven't seen like the full last couple of games, but it seems like some of the problems that have been there all season are kind of still there. Where
the lack of putting the ball into the net.
Yes, the lack of great score. So on another podcast I was on this past week, someone brought it up where you replace your top 2 strikers, your top 2 scorers with a fraction of the production, and this is what happens.
Yeah. Inherently, when they brought them in, they were an all Big Ten forward in Nick Kalukian. Michael Susky, who was a solid forward at the time for BC, he took last year off for whatever reason. There was some thought that some of that production would be replaced. However, in practice, that did not work as well as planned.
No, and as you've said many times, they have to get the ball to shoot the ball, and just getting it past the middle of the field seems to still be their biggest issue.
Yeah, and it's weird because it should be an experienced midfield that I don't know if it's tactically based on whatever's been seen that they're having any sort of trouble playing through the middle of the park. Also, Jonah Leibold has been out since the Albany game, I believe, and he
played 5 games. So
yeah,
however many that was.
So that's a huge hit for someone familiar with the system and was supposed to be an all ACC. Like literally everywhere was the ACC player to watch on this squad in the preseason. Even just losing his engine, let alone his production and anything else, is enough to put a hamper on things. So there's a lot of issues they've been trying to work out through the course of this. You had a keeper switch mid-season, which Jaheim Wickham has looked solid since he took over the role. So I'm not going to complain there, but it's been a very strange year, and now you have so much turnover after this season that there's even more question marks. So hopefully Max already got his ear on the transfer portal and grabbing some new European talent as well, and we'll see what goes on. But there's time for one last hurrah if they can find a way to eke a couple out. Now the big problem is they have NC State and then they face Virginia at Virginia. So that's not going to be an easy task by any stretch.
It's only Virginia. They don't have too many stars above their crest on their jersey.
Yeah, are they the winningest? I believe.
It's either them or St. Louis.
Yeah, I was trying to remember some of the early ones as to like how who actually has the most, but they're right up there.
Yeah. Well, hopefully soccer turns it around. Basketball certainly looks like they're turning the corner. Football, definitely not. And I think we'll all have a very different conversation based on what happens on that Friday game against BC. Mike and Dom, I'm assuming both of you will be there on Friday night.
I will be. Dom has a ticket available if he wants it.
I will be per Mike's student season pass there as part fan and part taking notes from what I'm going to see on the side, basically by the student section. So yes, I'll be there.
Yeah, I always love going to football games with my season tickets and the guys I go with, wondering why the hell I'm tapping things in the notes section on my phone. I'm like, it's fine, just don't worry about it.
I just tell people it's complicated.
Well, Steve will have use of his phone because he'll be using it to record it all 22 because he needs it to discern whatever happens in this game.
Yeah, I may just give up and just watch the game as a fan. I say that and then I won't. But...
Yeah, exactly.
We'll all be writing about this at some point in some capacity next week.
Yep.
Because knowing you, Steve, you're going to be taking notes on it, not to talk about it on this pod, but to lecture Seabass about it.
Yeah, that's when I get to that point, that's when I can't tell if I've succeeded or failed as a parent, if that ever happens. Maybe both.
Porque no las dos, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, hopefully it's not a tire fire by the time we rejoin you next week here on the Disloyal Idiots podcast. I'd like to thank Mike and Dom for hopping on this week from our friends at News Magician. Of course, you can read on the site newsmagician.com for all our great additional thoughts on where Syracuse needs to go as a program football-wise in order to improve, not just now, but in the future as well. Sundays at 8 p.m. on Twitch and YouTube, Disloyal Idiots, or on Fans First Sports Network. You can also follow along on your podcast platform of choice so that you can rate, review, subscribe, and also comment so that we can trick the algorithm into expanding the good old Ottoman Empire. For Steve, Andy's lost voice, I'm Christian de Guzman saying so long and go Orange.
Go Orange.
Go Orange.
Go Orange.